So that's one thing that we really need to look at closely, because that is I think that underpins a lot of those conversations. Having said that, it's been great seeing organisations embrace people with disabilities in a quick and straightforward way. And it's really good when you have managers who immediately see the benefits of technology and inclusion. And we need to promote those. And they're not promoted as much as we would like to see. You know, it's really interesting, Ming. We are 20 years into the 21st century, and we still, and even I, encounter very uninformed views of what, you know, deaf people and, of course, people with disabilities can achieve. And I really think it's because, amongst other reasons, is that we don't have a widespread information and education framework going from birth. I think that's one of the fundamental issues that we have in society, is that lack of interaction and lack of exposure to the diversity of disability.
For audiences in the US who are not familiar with the matter, can you explain to us what prompted the Prime Minister to order this commission and what it seeks to accomplish through this year-long investigation?
That's a really good question, and I can understand that people not living in Australia might be wondering what's been going on. The Prime Minister established the Royal Commission to expose the terrible stories and the terrible issues that we have been experiencing here in Australia of violence and abuse and neglect and exploitation of people with disabilities. And of course, we know that sadly that is widespread around the world as well. A Royal Commission has special powers. It's not a court of law. Rather, it is given the terms of reference, and as it is about violence and abuse, neglect and exploitation against people with disabilities, it is investigation. It investigates issues and then makes recommendations to the government for change. So we want to see change. We want to make sure that people with disabilities can live lives free of violence and abuse. For a commissioner such as myself who has a disability, like you and all our brothers and sisters around the world with disabilities, every day we face micro and macro forms of aggression or ableism. And so when I hear stories that are very confronting, I need to ensure that not only can I empathise, I absolutely empathise, I also need to make sure what are the things we can do to make sure they never occur again. The confronting things that we've heard are also, they shape my faith sometimes in humanity. And I think, how can someone be treated in such an appalling manner? How can we make sure that the future generation will never do things like that again? And I make sure I look after myself. You know, I make sure that I get the right support around me, that I make sure that I get a good night's sleep, despite all the confronting stories that I might have heard that day. And I also try to keep in mind, at the end of the day, it is my job to provide, with my commissioner colleagues, recommendations for positive change. And finally, I would say, despite my many years of advocacy, 20 plus years, I'm still shocked at the level of violence and abuse that we hear about in our work here. And I think it's important to remember what we're trying to achieve here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a perfect segue onto the next question, which is, what is the most optimistic result you all are hoping to achieve?
Ming, wow, a really great question, and clearly one that is foremost in my mind, and that is, what are the recommendations that we can develop to ensure that we are transforming the system? And that's our job here at the Royal Commission, is what are the system changes that we need to see, and of course attitudinal changes as well. And that will require a really deep, forensic look at the stories that are coming through, and then saying to organisations or holding them to account. Now, whilst the Royal Commission doesn't have power to force an organisation or an individual to change, it does have power to get the document that often organisations might withhold and say, we are not required to provide that to you. Well, we have power to get those documents and then take a look at them to see where the problem lies. So for me, I'm optimistic that if we can get that information, we can then do things which haven't been done before, and that is to take a really deep look at the underlying causes, the systems that are in place that prevent people with disabilities from living lives independently and free of violence. So that's the thing that keeps me going. Every day I wake up and I think, what can I do for the 4.5 million people with disability who live in Australia, and of course to my brothers and sisters and friends all around the globe, what can I do here in Australia to help you also live a better life? As you know, Ming, everyone wants to work and everyone has the potential. Everyone, and everyone is different. Some people are fantastic at the performing arts. Some people are great with, scientific invention. Other people are great at advocating and maybe being a lawyer. People with disabilities should also have those opportunities. In my career, I've always been conscious of, if I'm a leader, I'm only as good as my team. And of course, for me, a diverse and well-informed team is critical to the work that I do. Here at the Royal Commission, we've been very conscious of cutting through that. And I'm pleased to say that our workforce of people with disabilities is a strong one here. It can be better, and I'm sure it will over time. And we're also very conscious of making sure we don't put unnecessary barriers in place. Last but not least, we've got to look at the issue of people with disabilities who are in closed settings and getting paid very little. For example, we hear stories about people with disabilities getting paid $2 to $3 an hour. And we've got to really look at that, because that is an issue. It's segregation and it is discrimination. Underlying that, of course, are the things that people don't see. For example, if you can't get on the bus, then let's say you're going to work that day, or you're planning to go to work that day, and you can't get on the bus. Then, of course, you're missing out on economic opportunities. You're missing out on socialising and being with your work colleagues. So people on the bus sitting there watching you miss the bus don't also often think about the consequences. People without disability go, oh, well, it's a one-off. But no, it's more than a one-off, and it has real consequences to you and people with disabilities. Underpinning that, of course, is the perception or the assumption, or even blatantly, we are a burden on society. Most reasonable adjustments or accommodations, as you call them in America, is minute when we want to look at the bigger picture, and yet we see employers use that as a way to say, this is too costly, this is way too hard, and of course that leads into the bigger issue of we are seen as cumbersome and as burdens on society. So that's one thing that we really need to look at closely, because that is I think that underpins a lot of those conversations. Having said that, it's been great seeing organisations embrace people with disabilities in a quick and straightforward way. And it's really good when you have managers who immediately see the benefits of technology and inclusion. And we need to promote those. And they're not promoted as much as we would like to see. At the end of the day, people with disabilities, if they are in the workforce, then they are not on welfare or on other government programs. One of the things I want to see change is for when a child is born, and if they have a disability or are diagnosed with a disability early in life, which is simply implement the thing which will then make sure that they can be independent later in life. And of course, what I would like to see beyond the Disability Royal Commission is changes to systems. And that is probably fundamental, because for as long as we have systems, including in particular government and policy system, it's going to take a very long time for people without disability to embrace things which will enable people with disability to be part of life. And ultimately, for people with disability to be able to do all those little things that so many take for granted, going to school, going to the cinema, hanging out with their friends, traveling to see their family members, perhaps, for Thanksgiving, which is a very big event for you in the United States, Christmas, even just going on a simple holiday. So for me, that's what I'd like to see. And I'm very hopeful that we will see incremental change, and we need to keep up the fight.